You know that feeling, right? The one right before you have to do something big, give a presentation maybe, or face a tricky conversation. Your
Yeah.
palms get a little sweaty, maybe your heart rate picks up, and you definitely feel something. Well, something in your stomach.
Butterflies, or that pit in your stomach.
Exactly. That intuitive sense we call a gut feeling. We all have it. But,
Yeah.
like, how deeply are those physical feelings actually connected to what's happening up here in your brain and your emotions?
Well, it's a connection that's far more profound and scientifically fascinating than, conventional medicine really gave it credit for historically.
Okay.
So we're embarking on a deep dive today into this complex, often quite surprising world of the mind-gut connection.
And our map for this whole exploration is some really insightful material. It's drawn from Dr. Emeran Mayer's book, The Mind-Gut Connection.
Ah, yes. Great source.
It really is. And it challenges us, I think, to move beyond that old way of seeing our bodies as just like separate bits and pieces.
Right, like a machine.
Yeah, and start understanding them as this incredibly interconnected system, almost like an intelligent, living supercomputer.
Absolutely. And our mission here really is to unpack the most compelling insights from this material. We want to show you just how intricately linked your gut health is to, well, your brain health, your emotions, even the subtle ways you make decisions every single day.
So we'll look at how traditional thinking kind of missed this link. Maybe peek at the biological highways connecting your gut and brain.
Mm-hmm. Those nerve cables and hormones.
Here's some really revealing stories from patients. Dive into the world of those tiny microbes living inside you, which is just
It
amazing.
really is surprisingly influential.
And see how early life experiences lay the groundwork for it all. And yeah, discuss how your diet and even like the emotions you bring to the dinner table can shape this whole vital system.
It's a journey, really, into the remarkable universe inside your own body.
So let's jump right in. Let's rethink how we even picture the body. The source material points out that for a long time, medicine treated the body kind of like a mechanic treats a car.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If a part broke, say you had a stomach ulcer, you fix the stomach, that was it.
Or high blood pressure, you treated the circulatory system. The brain wasn't really seen as a major player in most chronic physical issues.
That old mechanistic view, treating organs as isolated units. That was the dominant way of thinking for decades. But as the material highlights, over the last, 40 or 50 years,
Mm-hmm.
we've seen this huge rise in complex chronic health problems, things like IBS, chronic pain, obesity, even mental health stuff.
And they just don't fit that old model, do they? That single part failure idea.
Not at all. And these problems involve much more complex regulatory mechanisms.
Like how your body handles food intake, metabolism, immune responses, brain function itself.
Right. And these systems are clearly being impacted by, well, our modern lifestyles. And what's really emerged as crucial is understanding the huge role played by the gut itself. And importantly, the trillions of microbes living inside it. That's your microbiota.
Right.
And the vast array of signaling molecules that produce the microbiome, these aren't just passive bystanders. They're major active players in these complex regulatory systems.
I love the comparison the source makes here. Early
Wow.
machines didn't have sophisticated computers running everything,
Exactly.
and neither did the medical models back then. They kind of lacked that concept of complex computing power, of distributed intelligence. They basically left the brain and its connection to the body out of the picture for so many diseases.
Right. So the new model needs to be much more sophisticated. Instead of a machine where one faulty part stops everything, think of your body more like a complex, highly interconnected ecological system, like a rainforest, maybe.
An ecosystem, I like that.
Yeah, its stability, its resilience, it comes from diversity and balance within that system. The source even suggests that the old idea of declaring war on individual cells or microbes, that might be less effective than seeing the gut microbiome like a friendly park ranger,
Yeah.
focused on maintaining biodiversity and the health of the whole ecosystem for overall resilience.
Okay, so how does this ecological supercomputer actually work? How do the gut and brain, talk to each other?
Well, they're constantly communicating. It's what the book calls a biological highway.
A highway, what does that look like inside us? Like actual wires?
Well, yeah, partly. It's a complex network. You've got direct wiring, these thick nerve cables. The most famous one is the vagus nerve.
Ah, the vagus nerve. Heard of that.
It acts like a major bidirectional trunk line, sends signals both ways up from the gut to the brain and down from the brain to the gut, influences everything, muscle contractions, immune cells.
Wow. And the other way.
And then there's communication through the bloodstream.
Yeah.
Using hormones, inflammatory signaling molecules, they travel all through the body.
So the gut is sending signals up that create physical sensations. We actually feel fullness, nausea, discomfort, but also that sense of well-being or unease we mentioned.
Exactly. And the brain isn't just sitting there passively receiving them. It processes them, and then it sends responses back down to the gut, influencing how the gut behaves.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The brain doesn't just react in the moment. It actually stores these gut sensations.
Stores them. You mean like a database of gut feelings?
Precisely. These stored gut feelings can then be accessed later, often subconsciously, and the material strongly suggests they can significantly influence your decision-making.
Not just like, do I want more pasta?
No, potentially much bigger things. Influencing how you assess situations, who you feel comfortable with, even complex decisions at work. It just underscores how deeply integrated this system is. It shapes not just your physical state, but your perception, your behavior.
Wow. So those gut feelings aren't just random noise. They're actually informed by a lifetime of experience stored in this interconnected system.
That really seems to be the picture emerging, and understanding this really pushes us towards that necessary shift in healthcare, moving from that fragmented machine view to this integrated ecological understanding.
Okay, let's make this more concrete. The source shares a few patient stories that really highlight this connection. There's Bill, a young patient with cyclical vomiting syndrome.
Ah, yes, Bill's story. It's a classic example, really, of the brain's stress circuits kind of hijacking the gut.
How so?
Well, his symptoms, that intense anxiety, the sweating, cold hands, pounding heart, often waking up super early with attacks.
Yeah.
It all mimicked a severe stress reaction. The issue wasn't just his stomach. The book points out it was more like faulty brakes on his brain's emergency response systems, triggering these awful false alarms.
And the book mentions a family history of migraines, which is interesting, because that's another chronic pain thing linked to nervous system sensitivity, right?
Exactly. It shows a potential predisposition for these kinds of conditions involving the nervous system. And the good news is medications that help calm down those hyperactive stress circuits in the brain, they can dramatically help patients like Bill, reduce the attacks, and just as importantly, reduce the fear of the next one.
Then there's Judy's everyday experience.
Judy's story is probably instantly relatable for loads of people dealing with stress. She gets that gut rumbling, the discomfort when she's stressed about a presentation, and then it starts after she eats. It's a clear, immediate link. Emotional state affects gut function. And her point about running on a full stomach interfering with exercise, it just shows how the gut's activity impacts other body systems too.
In Frank's story, the 75-year-old who developed these really persistent, kind of strange sensations after his wife died.
Yeah, Frank's case is complex. He had this lump in the throat feeling, belching, chest discomfort, even breathlessness, symptoms all over his GI tract. Now, some might quickly label that as purely psychological, right? It's all in his head. But the source emphasizes that the gut has incredibly sophisticated sensory machinery. Specific receptors for chemicals like menthol receptors, which might explain his chest sensation. It's not just imaginary.
And his partner noticed his symptoms got way worse with an unhealthy diet. Lots of animal fat, sugar, those intense cravings for cake, pizza, rich cheeses.
Right, and that raises a critical question. Could consistently eating those foods have actually sensitized his gut's communication pathways over time?
Made him hypersensitive.
Exactly. Hypersensitive to normal gut functions, maybe even experimental stimuli used in studies. It strongly suggests diet can sort of prime or alter how responsive this gut-brain highway is.
The source really stresses that your gut is basically providing this constant, detailed report to the brain, like an internal surveillance system.
It is. It's a highly sophisticated quality control and security setup. Your gut reports on everything about the food passing through volume, chemicals, fat, protein, carbs, texture, particle size.
And it's watching for intruders, too. Bacteria, viruses, toxins.
Absolutely. High alert. And it has swift, sometimes pretty dramatic ways of dealing with threat.
Yeah, like getting rid of them fast.
You got it. If it detects something harmful, bang. It can trigger responses to expel it, stimulate water secretion, reverse peristalsis for vomiting, or speed up transit for, well, rapid diarrhea. It's a vital protective mechanism.
The book mentions George Miller's severe ulcer, too, just reminding us how debilitating these gut issues can be.
It does. And the author's own personal, very vivid experience with food poisoning on a bus in India.
Oh, yeah, that sounded rough.
He describes it as something that just permanently etched the power of gut sensations into his emotional memory. It shows how fast the gut can switch gears. Toxins from bacteria like E. coli bind to specific cells in the intestine.
Serotonin cells.
Serotonin-containing cells, yeah. And it immediately triggers that intense expulsion, horrific vomiting, hurricane-like diarrhea, as he puts it. A powerful demonstration of direct chemical interaction driving dramatic physical outcomes.
So the gut isn't just sending vague feelings. It's sending highly specific info and triggering precise, sometimes violent responses.
Exactly. And a lot of this sophisticated reporting happens in dialogue with our microbial residents.
Yes. Microbe speak.
Oh.
The gut-brain dialogue. The sources take us back a bit to early research in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, places like the CRRE Center at UCLA. They were a major hub for studying gut mechanisms back then. Dr. John Walsh's work on gut hormones or gut peptides was really foundational.
But at first, they just saw these as simple chemical switches, right? Like turning digestion on or off.
That was the initial kind of limited view, yeah. But over time, the understanding just grew exponentially. These molecules weren't seen as simple switches anymore, but as part of a complex, really nuanced biological language.
Okay.
And crucially, it became clear this language wasn't just used by our own cells, it was also being used by the trillions of microbes in our intestines to communicate, not just with the gut lining, but ultimately with the brain.
A universal biological language, spoken by us and the bacteria living inside us. That's incredible.
It is pretty mind-blowing.
The source even mentions how some microbes in nature have evolved these sophisticated ways to manipulate host behavior for their own survival, like rabies making animals aggressive.
Or toxoplasma altering rodent behavior, yeah. While those are pathogens, they illustrate the principle. Microbes can influence host behavior.
But our relationship with our gut microbes is different, more collaborative.
Oh, absolutely. It's a deeply ancient symbiotic partnership evolved over millions of years across countless species because it benefits both sides.
And our microbes get a pretty sweet deal out of it, right? Food, shelter.
They get a fantastic deal. Stable environment, constant food supply, controlled temperature, built-in transport, and importantly, they have privileged access to our internal communication network hormones, peptides, nerve impulses.
So they're literally listening in on our stress levels, our mood, maybe even our sleep.
Precisely. And having access to all that information allows them to adjust their own metabolic output, the chemicals they produce from the food we give them, not just for their own survival, but to maintain a state of balance, of harmony with the whole gut environment. It's like a continuous negotiation.
The idea that microbes might use molecules similar to ours, that was floated early on, wasn't it? The author co-wrote a paper back in '91 called Are Gut Peptides the Words of a Universal Biological Language?
Yes, that was a bold speculative idea back then, co-authored with a mathematician, exploring these potential cross-kingdom signaling molecules. But, the scientific world wasn't quite ready for how significant these microbial players would turn out to be.
Took a while to catch on.
It really did. Took nearly 3 decades for gut microbes to really move back to center stage in gut-brain research.
So the big question then, can these microbes actually influence how we feel or think? Can they change our brain?
Well, recent research is providing some pretty compelling answers, and the answer seems to be yes. Some gut microbes can produce neuroactive molecules, like GABA, for instance.
GABA, the anti-anxiety molecule.
That's the one. Now, ordinary antibiotics don't usually cause mood swings, but certain beneficial bacteria strains like lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, the kinds you find in probiotics and fermented foods, they actually have the metabolic machinery to produce GABA.
Wow. And the book highlights a specific UCLA study on this.
That study was really groundbreaking. It showed a measurable change in human brain function purely through dietary manipulation of the gut microbiota. Women who ate probiotic-enriched yogurt daily for 4 weeks showed less resting connectivity between certain brain regions involved in processing emotions.
Less connectivity.
Less connectivity during an emotion recognition task compared to a control group. It strongly suggests that changing your gut microbes can directly influence basic emotional reflexes in the brain.
Okay, that's huge. So they can make brain-altering chemicals, and changing the mix changes brain function.
Yeah.
Does it go the other way? Can our emotions affect the microbes?
That's a key piece of the puzzle. And yes, the source suggests it's very likely a two-way street. Negative emotions, chronic stress, anger, sadness, anxiety, they might dramatically alter the mix of metabolites your gut microbes produce from the food you eat.
So stress microbes make different stuff than happy microbes.
That's the intriguing speculation, yeah. that maybe what the book calls happy microbes might produce different, potentially more beneficial metabolites.
So it's this constant feedback loop, a dynamic conversation happening inside us all the time.
It truly is. The microbes are listening, and they are talking back, potentially influencing our emotional state, maybe even our decisions.
Incredibly complex system gets built and programmed in the first place. The sources really emphasize the critical role of early life experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Looking at a patient's history, digging into those first 18 years or so, it can often uncover more significant clues about their later health issues than just listing current symptoms.
And there's a strong link between adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and long-term health.
A very strong link. Extensive studies show this powerful correlation between adverse events in childhood, things like abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, chronic stress from poverty, and a significantly increased risk for a whole range of chronic physical diseases and mental health issues, like alcoholism and depression later in adulthood. The risk goes up with the number of ACEs someone experienced. These experiences fundamentally compromise the stability and nurturing needed for healthy development.
And this early stress seems to directly mess with the stress response system itself.
It does. Early life stress can lead to an upregulation and increase in CRF activity in the brain.
A CRF.
Corticotropin releasing factor.
Yeah.
It's a key master switch for the stress response. In animal models, increasing CRF can cause stress-related behaviors and gut hypersensitivity. But interestingly, while drugs blocking CRF looked promising in animals for gut issues,
They didn't work so well in humans.
they haven't seen the same success, no, which suggests the human brain's stress system is far more complex, probably more deeply programmed by those early experiences.
The source also gets into something called epigenetic inheritance. Sounds complicated.
It's a revolutionary idea, but the basics are understandable. It means that specific interactions, especially between a mother and her baby very early on, can chemically modify the baby's genes.
To modify the genes, like change the DNA.
Not change the DNA sequence itself, no, but add little chemical tags, like methylation is a common one, that affect how easily certain genes can be switched on or off.
Oh, okay.
So a mother's stress level, or conversely her nurturing behavior, can epigenetically program her child's stress response system, essentially preparing them for the kind of world the mother experienced, whether it seems safe or dangerous.
Wow. And microbes play a role right from the very, very beginning.
A totally crucial role. The book uses the Yanomami birth story and natural delivery out in a microbe-rich environment to illustrate this beautifully. The mother's vaginal microbes are the very first colonizers of the newborn's sterile gut. They provide the essential metabolic machinery the baby needs to start digesting complex sugars in breast milk.
Which brings up the whole difference between vaginal birth and C-section delivery.
Exactly. Vaginal delivery gives that initial, crucial inoculation of beneficial microbes. It's a healthy jumpstart for the gut. With a C-section, babies get colonized mainly by skin microbes, hospital microbes, not the same beneficial mix.
And that matters long term.
Well, important beneficial bacteria like bifidobacteria colonize much slower after C-section. And studies do show C-section babies have an increased risk later for things like C. difficile infections and obesity. Scientists are actively researching potential links to more serious brain disorders, too, like autism spectrum disorder, and even early low-dose antibiotic exposure in mice. That's shown long-lasting negative effects on their gut microbes and makes them more susceptible to problems from a high-fat diet later on.
And breastfeeding adds another critical layer on top of birth method.
Absolutely vital. Human milk contains these unique carbohydrates called human milk oligosaccharides, or HMOs.
HMOs.
And what's amazing is we can't digest them. Evolution designed HMOs specifically as food for beneficial gut bacteria, especially one called Bifidobacterium infantis.
So it's like targeted fertilizer for the good guys.
Pretty much. It helps those good bacteria thrive, keeps pathogens out, and promotes healthy microbiome development during that critical early period when diversity is naturally low.
The book connects prolonged breastfeeding, like you see in some hunter-gatherer groups, with this critical window for brain development.
Yeah, there's this fascinating hypothesis that the duration of breastfeeding and therefore the sustained delivery of HMOs and the specific microbial environment it fosters overlaps significantly with critical periods of brain circuit development.
So it might actually promote healthier emotional and neurological development.
That's the idea. The link between breastfeeding and, say, reduced emotional reactivity later. It could involve oxytocin release from the physical contact, or it could involve beneficial metabolites, like GABA being produced by those microbes feasting on the HMOs. or both.
So it's this incredible co-development happening in those early years. The brain's architecture and the gut's microbial community are literally growing up together.
It certainly seems that way. And the evidence suggests that the quality and duration of factors like birth method and breastfeeding can profoundly shape the resilience of this gut-brain connection for life. Early life really does set the stage.
Okay, let's shift gears to something we all interact with multiple times a day: food. Beyond just fuel, the source reminds us, food is so central to human culture connection.
It really is globally. But our modern diet, our modern eating habits, they're a significant departure from those traditional, often communal meals based on natural, diverse ingredients. The book notes this sort of collective yearning, almost, for what we've lost in that shift to convenience and processed foods.
And this modern diet, particularly meals high in certain fats, seems to be linked pretty strongly to inflammation.
Yes. Consuming high-fat meals increases inflammatory molecules, like cytokines, in the body. It also tends to change the gut microbial population, favoring bacteria whose cell walls contain LPS lipopolysaccharide.
LPS, that sounds bad.
It's another potent inflammatory molecule, and these molecules can increase gut leakiness, allowing more inflammatory stuff into the bloodstream, activating immune cells lining the gut. Gut microbes are really pivotal mediators of this diet-induced inflammation.
The source also outlines a pretty concerning link between diet, stress, and that urge for comfort food.
It describes a bit of a vicious cycle. Repeatedly eating highly palatable foods, sugary, fatty things, especially when you're stressed.
Yeah.
It can lead to belly fat accumulation. And interestingly, in animals, it can actually suppress the normal stress hormone response. A study mentioned found women with a history of stress-related comfort eating had a blunted cortisol response to stress, but were more likely to be obese.
So the food gives temporary stress relief, but at a cost.
Exactly. This food-induced stress reduction seems to come at the cost of detrimental physical changes. And chronic stress combined with a high-fat, high-sugar diet, they can synergize, making inflammation even worse by increasing that gut leakiness and activating immune cells.
So stress makes you crave comfort food, which makes the gut leakier and more inflamed, which might even affect stress signals.
Wow. It's a powerful example of how behavior and diet combine to harm the system. It reinforces those upregulated stress circuits.
The source even brings up the concept of food addiction here.
Yeah, for certain vulnerable individuals, specific foods, especially high sugar ones or those highly palatable combinations, can trigger psychological and behavioral responses that look strikingly similar to addictive substances.
Really? Like drugs?
The brain pathways involved show similarities. Studies show overweight and obese individuals often have structural and functional changes in their brain's reward systems. And learned associations, like seeing tempting food ads, can stimulate these altered reward pathways, driving overeating. If someone's already vulnerable, maybe with poor appetite control and some inflammation, those images create powerful cravings.
It sounds like the modern food system itself is part of the problem, not just our individual choices.
The source definitely makes that point strongly. Think about monoculture farming, lacks biodiversity, relies heavily on chemicals like pesticides, glyphosate is mentioned. This likely impacts microbial diversity in the soil, then in the animals eating crops from that soil, and eventually in our own guts. Plus, the widespread use of low-dose antibiotics in meat and seafood production that directly harms our beneficial gut microbes, too.
And then there are all the processed foods with additives, like vital gluten.
Right. Vital gluten is added to tons of processed foods for texture, shelf life, binding things together. The sheer increase in how much we consume raises questions about its impact, possibly through gut microbes, maybe contributing to things like non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
Is it the gluten, though, or other stuff in processed foods?
That's the question the book raises. Is it just the gluten? Or is it the combination of additives, the lack of fiber, the processing itself? It highlights how complex it is to figure out exactly what in our modern diet is causing problems.
But in stark contrast, the Mediterranean diet gets consistent praise.
It really does. It's maybe the only dietary pattern with such broad consensus among nutrition experts for its health benefits. It evolved over millennia, right? Rich and diverse plants, healthy fats like olive oil, fish, low and red meat.
And the evidence linking it to better health outcomes is strong.
Extensive and robust. Reduced overall mortality, better outcomes for metabolic syndrome, heart disease, cancer, cognitive impairment, even depression.
And specific benefits for the brain, too.
Yep. Studies in older Americans who adhered more closely to a Mediterranean diet showed correlations with larger brain volumes and better white matter integrity, basically, healthier brain structure. And lower meat, higher fish consumption seemed particularly key within that pattern.
Polyphenols get highlighted as important components. What are those again?
They're beneficial compounds found abundantly in plant-based foods, especially in high-quality extra virgin olive oil, nuts, berries, even red wine has them. They seem to have a very positive effect on the gut microbiota.
So they feed the good microbes.
They seem to encourage a healthy balance, yeah. The book even mentions a small study suggesting red wine might favorably alter gut microbial composition, likely due to its polyphenols.
And that fascinating little note about ancient olive trees and the longevity of people in regions where they consume oil from those trees regularly.
It's a truly provocative thought, isn't it? It makes you wonder, is there something unique about the chemical compounds in foods from these really old, resilient plants, the kind of microbial communities they support, and the whole lifestyle that goes with consuming that diet? Does it all contribute collectively to human health and longevity? It kind of circles back to that whole ecosystem idea.
So diet is clearly a fundamental way we interact with and shape this entire gut-brain system every day.
Arguably the most direct and frequent interaction you have with this whole intricate biological network, yeah.
Okay, let's wrap things up by looking at how we can actually use these insights. How can we optimize our own gut-brain health? First, how should we even define optimal health in this context? Is it just not being sick?
The material defines it really nicely, I think. It's not just the absence of diagnosed disease, it's about resilience.
Resilience.
Yeah, your system's ability to handle disturbances, stress, infection, dietary changes, and bounce back to a stable, healthy state.
And that ecological view of the gut microbiome helps here. Thinking of it like a landscape with valleys representing stable states.
Exactly. That metaphor helps visualize health versus chronic disease. Different parts of your body are different microbial habitats, low diversity in the stomach and small intestine, super high diversity in the large intestine. Stable states in that landscape, those deep valleys, represent either a healthy balance or a chronic disease state.
And some microbial landscapes are just more vulnerable, less resilient. Less deep valleys, maybe?
Precisely. The book uses the example of Mrs. Stone, who had prolonged symptoms after food poisoning. It suggested her gut ecosystem was less resilient to start with. Things like early adverse life events, chronic stress, or a long-term high-fat, low-fiber diet. They can permanently alter that microbial landscape, making it less stable, more easily disrupted later on.
And these early alterations, these less resilient landscapes, could potentially show up much later in life as bigger problems.
That is the concern, yes. Altering that gut microbiota-brain dialogue early could reduce resilience down the line, increasing vulnerability to degenerative brain disorders like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Some evidence even suggests those diseases might actually start in the gut decades earlier.
Wow. So we really need to pay attention to this system early on.
It emphasizes the critical need, yeah.
So research is pushing hard now to figure out how to intervene, how to target the microbiome for better health.
Oh, it's evolving incredibly rapidly. But key questions remain, like how do these microbial communities assemble in the first place? Exactly how does childhood impact adult health trajectories? And crucially, how can we achieve or restore that stability and resilience once it's been lost? We need more rigorous studies, for sure.
But based on the insights in this material, what are some evidence-based steps we can take right now? Practical things.
There are definitely practical things you can incorporate. First, actively try to avoid things known to reduce microbial diversity.
Like those modern farming practices we talked about.
Exactly. Pesticides like glyphosate, the routine low-dose antibiotics used in raising meat and seafood. These are likely detrimental. Choosing organic or certified antibiotic-free options when you can, that's a positive step.
Makes sense. And on the flip side, add things that increase diversity and resilience.
Yes. Maximize your intake of fermented foods. Things like yogurt with live cultures, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, and consider probiotics. While the science on specific strains for specific conditions is still developing.
It's complex.
It is, but increasing your regular intake, especially during stressful times after taking antibiotics or as you get older, it seems prudent for promoting diversity and resilience. All those fermented foods contain beneficial microbes.
The book also mentions fasting and something called the migrating motor complex. What's that?
That's that natural housekeeping wave. It's a series of contractions that sweeps through your digestive tract when you haven't eaten for a few hours, like overnight.
Ah, the stomach rumbling when you're hungry.
Sometimes, yeah. It's known to help clear excess microbes out of the small intestine, which helps prevent issues like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We don't fully understand its effect on the large intestine's microbes yet, but it's definitely an active process happening during fasting periods.
Interesting. And mindful eating is highlighted as surprisingly important for the gut-brain axis.
It's crucial because negative emotions, stress, anger, sadness, anxiety, they literally show up at the dinner table physiologically in your body, and they're bad for this system. They can disrupt digestion, increase inflammation, and trigger those cravings for unhealthy comfort foods we discussed.
So what's the advice?
Check in with your body and mind before you eat. Scam yourself. If you're feeling really stressed or upset, maybe try to address that emotion first. Take a few deep breaths, step away for a minute, rather than just piling food into that internal turmoil. And obviously for chronic anxiety or depression, seeking professional help is absolutely vital.
And the opposite is probably true too. Positive emotions are good for this system.
Very likely, yes. The book emphasizes the value of enjoying meals together, socially. Positive emotions, happiness, joy, feeling connected during a meal, they're probably sending beneficial signals down to the gut.
Happy gut, happy microbes.
That's the speculation, that those happy microbes might produce metabolites that are good for us. Social interaction itself is probably a significant, often overlooked component of the health benefits we see with diets like the Mediterranean diet.
So it's not just what you eat, but also how you feel when you eat it, and maybe even who you share it with.
It really seems like the emotional and social context of eating is a key part of optimizing this incredibly complex gut-brain system.
This has been a truly incredible deep dive. We've gone from that old machine model to seeing the body as this complex ecosystem, explored the biological highways linking gut and brain, understood how early life and those tiny microbes shape everything, and seen the huge impact of modern diet and even our feelings.
It really underscores something important, I think. We're often captivated by exploring outer space or the depths of the ocean, but there's an equally vast and complex universe residing right here inside each of us.
Yeah.
And science is only just beginning to really unlock its secrets. But the implications for our health, our well-being, how we experience the world, they're immense.
So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. Given this deep, constant, two-way conversation happening between our gut, our microbes, our emotions, and our brain, could learning to truly tune into and maybe even trust those ancient biological signals, those gut feelings, actually be one of the most important skills we can cultivate for navigating the complexities and challenges of this modern world?
That's definitely something worth pondering.